Well, welcome back. We've got Charlie Oppenheim here with his live reaction for the much anticipated October 2024 Visa Bulletin. So, Charlie, good to be back with you. It's been a minute.
Yeah, good to see you again.
So, tell us what we're seeing on the October Visa Bulletin. This really sets the tone for the 2025 fiscal year for the government. What do we got? What are we looking at?
Right. On this first slide, we're looking at the dates for filing, and this chart indicates where the State Department believes the final action dates will be no later than September of 2025. So this allows applicants to file with Immigration Service if they're doing adjustment of status or begin submitting their required paperwork to the National Visa Center of Processing overseas.
Right. And so we've seen on this dates for filing for October 2024 a big movement, but this just means that the applicants can file their adjustment of status applications. But can you explain, what that means for their application processing, right? It doesn't mean it'll be approved, and in fact could mean several months or years for approval. Can you give us some context about these dates for filing moving up, but not much movement in the final action calendar for 2024?
Sure. These application filing dates listed in Chart B are intended to generate potential demand that could be met in later months. So this does not indicate, as you said, what's available now, but these cases, they want applicants to start filing with the USCIS or submitting their documentation so that if their priority date is reached, say in July, then the case will be ready for final action at that time and can result in the issuance of a visa overseas or issuance of an adjustment of status in the U.S. instead of the applicant having to wait until July when their priority date is reached, only then submitting the documentation and having 4 to 6 or more months for the case to be acted upon. So again, this provides the opportunity for people to file their information, and they should do so as quickly as possible because the Immigration Service may determine that at a future date, and typically it's in January to March, that they will stop allowing these dates to be used for filing.
Yeah, and it's much better to be a adjustment of status applicant than waiting to file your adjustment of status. So if you're not already working with counsel, if you have a valid date for filing, priority date to move forward and get that filed in October if your priority date meets it. One question I have, a category that I follow very closely, or two categories I follow very closely are EB2, EB3 for both China and India. And the one thing I noticed is that the India EB2, EB3 dates for filing, we've got a 2013 date approximately here. It still hasn't eclipsed the October 2021 dates for filing. So how come we're still not seeing those dates for filing reach a date that we've seen 3 years ago?
The reason is during fiscal 21, 22, and 23, the annual employment limits were at all-time record highs. Therefore, the State Department had to advance the application filing dates in those years to generate sufficient demand to maximize number use. For fiscal 2024 and the upcoming 2025 year, the annual employment limit is much more restrictive. It's back to pretty much where it had been, and therefore they do not need as many people to be filing now. And so they've, quote, retrogressed the application filing date because they no longer need the people with later dates to be filing. For practical purposes, it makes no difference because anybody that was eligible before should have filed and their case should be on file. So it's more of an optics type of thing.
Got it. So take us through the employment-based final action and any trends we're seeing or anything you can kind of let us know what to expect for the opening of the government's fiscal 2025 year with this October Visa Bulletin.
Yeah, we saw some advances in the all chargeability areas. There was only in the third preference is the only area where we saw any advancement of the date. And it just basically the third preference recovered from the retrogression which had occurred in July. So they got back within 1 or 2 weeks of that retrogression. This will allow any of those cases that were caught up in the July retrogression to be finalized during the month of October. But for the employment first and second preference categories, there was no change in the final action date. And this is for all the categories, whether it's rest of world, China, or India. The fact that October dates did not move is a reflection of the fact that the annual limits in the most of the employment categories were reached in mid-October or early September. Therefore, they're having a much larger pool of applicants that they have to accommodate in October under the new annual limits. Therefore, they're not able to advance the dates for the month of October. So hopefully for November, we will see some type of forward movement.
Good to know. So what I'm hearing is because there were still so many applications not finalized that were filed in September or October or were still on file, we didn't see the traditional big jump in October of this year. Okay.
Correct.
So what's happening with China employment-based categories here?
China was very lucky. The employment first and second preference dates had minimal movement, but at least it was a movement. It'll be interesting to see if the State Department continues with their policy of the last fiscal year, which appeared to be large movements at the first month of each quarter. Last year, there was large movement of the October dates, then January, etc. We'll have to wait and see if that occurs again this year. But I think that the China movement in the first, second, and third preference is going to be minimal, maybe anywhere for the 1 to 3 weeks in each of the first, second, and third preference, probably only up to 1 week in the first, 2 weeks in the second, and maybe up to 3 weeks for China third in the coming months.
And we saw China EB3 retrogress for final action. Any thoughts on what was happening there?
Yeah, in my conversations with former colleagues in the past several months, the amount of demand that's being received across all categories, whether it's China, India, or rest of world, the demand is still extremely high. Department of Labor and or USCIS processing backlogs began to be addressed in large scale in fiscal 2023, which is when we started seeing employment second, rest of world, final action dates, et cetera. So the reduction of those earlier backlogs meant that more applicants are becoming ready to finalize action on their case with very early priority dates. That is limiting forward movement of the final action dates. And for China, they had such a large number in China third preference, they had no choice but to retrogress the date.
Got it. Okay, and then India and the employment-based final action. What trends are you seeing here and what can we expect in the months to come?
Here in first and second preference, there was no movement. It was only a 1 week movement for India third preference. I think for India first preference, no movement or up to 1 week is all we can expect during the first quarter in the coming months. For employment second, I would say 0 to up to 2 weeks forward movement of the date. And for India third, most likely that third preference India date will be held for a period of time, but when it does move, no more than 2 weeks. And when I give my 0 to 2, 3, or whatever estimates, that's on average over the course of several months. So
sure. So that to me says, if you've got a date for filing, that's excellent, take action. But as far as approval, we're not going to see much movement, as you're saying, for the final action trend. So we're not going to see those dates for filing or folks that are able to file in the India EB1, 2, or 3 category. If you're able to file, don't expect to receive any approvals anytime soon because those final action dates, as Charlie's saying, are going to be just slowly creeping up 1 to 2 weeks, like he said, in the coming months.
Yeah. And one of the important things to mention is the Immigration and Nationality Act indicates that approximately 27% of the overall annual limit can be used in each of the first 3 quarters. And that is a very limiting factor. For example, on a per country limit for China and India, the per country limit is in employment first, second, and third preference categories only allows 810 numbers to be used during each of the first 3 quarters. That is a very small amount. When I was working, there were times when we'd have several hundred applicants in a specific weekly grouping. So again, the administration of the Immigration and Nationality Act is going to require limited movement of the final action dates for China and India, and in part because there are no rest of world unused numbers to fall across for potential use as there had been in previous years for India second preference or India third preference.
Amazing. And just to wrap us up, any comments on the family side of the chart?
No, there were actually only the family 2A category for rest of world moved by 1 week. All of the other preference categories were held. This indicates to me that there should be heavy demand. So I would expect when the State Department publishes their number use for fiscal 2024, they should be very close to reaching the 226,000 annual family limit. And like I said, still have excess demand, which is preventing them from moving those dates forward. But I would expect them to begin moving in November.
Okay. So the good news is the government is using the full family allotment. The tough news here is that because there's so much demand, that's why we're not seeing movement in this October 2024 bulletin.
Correct. And if when the State Department publishes the data that they are not very close to the 226,000, the question would be, why did they hold the August and September family dates and not advance them in an attempt to maximize family-sponsored number use during fiscal 2024?
So you'll be sure to analyze and break that down once that data is released, right, Charlie?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all we've got for our live reaction. Stay tuned for more content where we dive a little bit deeper and provide more analysis on what your company, what global mobility leaders can make of the October 2024 new fiscal year visa bulletin. Thanks for joining us.